Good afternoon. This is Nina Stack. I'm president of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers and really pleased to welcome you all to our weekly post-Sandy Funders Briefing call. Today's briefing is going to focus on mental health and wellness in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. We're really very pleased to welcome several guest speakers who are joining us today. We have Wendy Yalowitz, Program Officer of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Carolyn Beauchamp, President and CEO of the Mental Health Association of New Jersey, Carol Chang, Chief Programs Officer for the North Jersey region of the American Red Cross, and Judy Rogers, Case Management Supervisor of the American Red Cross. As many of you know, we began these calls 1 week after Hurricane Sandy struck 1 year ago. From November of 2012 through March 2013, we produced 17 funder briefing calls. This second series of calls began in early September and will conclude next week, November 4th. In total, we will have had 25 calls. Today's call is being recorded, and the audio link will be posted on our website along with the other 23 calls we've held to date. As many of you know, the briefings provide grant makers the opportunity to hear from a wide range of experts. We've had federal, state, and local government officials, national leaders in disaster philanthropy, FEMA and HUD officials, New Jersey policymakers, leaders of New Jersey's long-term recovery groups, nonprofit leaders, environmentalists, planners, and a host of other stakeholders. The calls are welcome to New Jersey-based grant makers along with national funders, and each call allows for a Q&A with our guests, as well as time for grant makers, we hope, if there's time, to discuss and build upon their collective and individual efforts. While our calls are intended only for members of the funding community, we can't guarantee that there aren't other individuals who have dialed in. Nearly 1 year later, our post-Sandy work here at the Council continues, and these calls represent one big important aspect of our ongoing efforts. In addition to posting the audio files of our briefings, we hope to transcribe brief summaries of all 25 calls that can be used in helping to tell the story of what took place following Hurricane Sandy, and will help increase access to valuable information contained within all of the audio files. We're currently looking for some support to underwrite the cost of this initiative, and we hope to work with one of the universities, perhaps the Cornwell Center, to get these summaries done. We're also really pleased to announce that we're partnering with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy in association with the Forum of Regional Associations of Grantmakers in the creation of a playbook featuring strategies that philanthropies have used nationwide post-disaster. We've learned so much from our colleagues around the country in the months and weeks since Sandy about the issues that communities face, and we want to make sure we can build on what we've learned and what others have learned so that the funding community can have a really effective and efficient tool going forward. We also hope to work with the Foundation Center and the Center for Disaster Philanthropy and Philanthropy New York to produce a scan of how the philanthropic sector responded specifically to Hurricane Sandy throughout the region with a dedicated section on New Jersey. We've learned from past disasters that having this kind of data on nonprofits that are being supported provides a roadmap for funders outside the region who might be looking to contribute to recovery initiatives. And we know all the coverage that's gone on in the last 2 days, there is still so much more that needs to be done. We know that we all need, and the entire philanthropic community needs to be engaged in this for many years to come. I also want to remind you that we have a dedicated area on our website specific to Hurricane Sandy work and resources. If you have any questions about our Sandy work, please do not hesitate to reach out to me or to Elizabeth Murphy, who has done such a stellar job in managing our post-Sandy work. Elizabeth can be reached by her email, which is her name, Elizabeth Murphy, that's with a Z, at cnjg.org. I also just want to mention that tomorrow New Jersey Future is hosting a day-long Sandy anniversary conference at Monmouth University. You can get more information on their website, which is njfuture.org. And also tomorrow evening, NJPAC is hosting an event entitled Arts Take Action, Sandy 1 year later. There's more information on their website at njpac.org. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker and moderator for today's call. Wendy Yalowitz. Wendy is Program Officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, whose mission is to improve the health and health care of all Americans. As the nation's largest philanthropy devoted exclusively to health and health care, the Foundation works with a diverse group of organizations and individuals to identify solutions and achieve comprehensive, measurable, and timely change. The Foundation works to address problems at their roots and to help make a difference on the widest scale, particularly for the most vulnerable among us. We are very fortunate to have the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation based here in New Jersey and supporting all the various things that they do right here in their home state, and they've certainly been a key player in the Sandy recovery and rebuilding work. I'm going to ask Wendy to unmute your line now by pressing *7. Wendy, are you with us? Press *7 to unmute.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm really happy to be able to participate on this call for many reasons, but specifically to share why I think and why we at the Foundation think mental health is so important. You know, the topic of mental health has never been very popular, and unfortunately, when someone says mental health, we usually think of mental illness. But we know that mental illness is really a diagnosed clinical condition that disrupts a person's thinking, feeling, and mood and daily functioning. But what we don't often talk about is how mental health really includes mental wellness, which is incredibly important to us every day. Good mental health strengthens and supports our ability to have healthy, meaningful relationships, make good choices, adapt to change, cope with challenges, and enhance our ability to contribute to the community and society. Good mental health is important for maintaining our overall physical health and well-being and, of course, achieving our greatest potential. But on the other hand, poor mental health increases the likelihood that we will make unhealthy behavioral choices, leading to medical problems like chronic illnesses, smoking, drug and alcohol abuse, poor eating habits, all these things that really would create more issues down the road and bigger need for medical services. But good mental health and mental well-being is not just the absence of mental illness. It refers to the ability to also bounce back from adversity, trauma, and stress. People who are mentally and emotionally healthy are resilient and have the tools to cope with difficult situations and maintain a good, positive outlook on life. They also have the ability to balance stress and their emotions that could help prevent more mental health issues down the road. On the other hand, people suffering from mental illness lack the skills and tools to cope with difficult situations and lack the pathway to maintain a positive outlook in life. And those symptoms affect their ability to go about their day and maintain relationships. However, when mental health issues are addressed and we target them, we can overcome hardships and challenges and learn how to live a better and fulfilling life. With the proper support, so promotion of wellness, prevention of mental illness, early identification, intervention, treatment, we can live a much longer, promising life, making positive decisions and engaging in healthy relationships. So this all being said, what does this have to do with the recovery of Hurricane Sandy? Here at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, even after, many years of Hurricane Katrina, we know that the statistics told us that after 4 years, about 1/3% of survivors of Hurricane Katrina still had PTSS, and 38% of those still had psychological distress. So obviously, disasters leave significant, disabling, and lasting psychological scars many, many years after the catastrophe hits. And especially if these individuals have pre-existing mental health issues, they're even more vulnerable. And I think it was in New Orleans a month after Hurricane Katrina, 17% of residents reported symptoms consistent with serious mental illness compared to the 10% of those who lived in surrounding areas and only 1 to 3% in the general population. For example, among Hurricane Katrina survivors, there were striking differences in the rates of mental health disorders depending on how people felt about the difficulties they had finding food and shelters. Survivors who continued to face such adversity because of the government's slow response had a much higher rate of mental health problems. So Hurricane Sandy was the worst storm to hit New Jersey, and waiting for the storm and dealing with the effects created enormous anxiety and depression due to the incredible stressors people had to deal with and that are still dealing with just a year after the storm. Many individuals and families were evacuated. Many are still displaced. We hear this all the time, and waiting for their homes to either hopefully be prepared, but others have lost everything and have had to completely change their schedule and their lifestyle. And then you have your children and youth who are especially at risk for mental health issues. Not only are they dealing with their own trauma, but they're watching how their parents are feeling and functioning, which obviously affects their everyday life. However, these children, parents, and individuals have had to deal with trauma, loss, fear, and other emotional stressors that, unless addressed, could create long-lasting unhealthy effects. So obviously, once again, if you bring it back to what I was talking about in the beginning, this strain could lead to downward spiraling of drugs and alcohol use and anger and violence. So this is why the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation wanted to invest in promoting mental wellness and addressing mental health issues. We are aware that this is extremely important for a culture of health and supporting New Jersey's recovery and resilience. That is why it is so important to support the promotion of mental health and wellness and identify ways when people need help and continue delivering treatment options, that those things are available. I think this call will leave us with some good examples of what providers and organizations are doing in New Jersey and hopefully push us to identify other opportunities. So that being said, it is really my pleasure to introduce Carolyn Beauchamp, who is the President and CEO of the Mental Health Association of New Jersey. In addition to a wide range of programs and services offered by the Mental Health Association in New Jersey, they also manage the New Jersey Disaster Mental Health Helpline, which provides public access to targeted mental health services in case of natural or man-made disaster or terrorist attacks. This helpline is equipped to quickly develop resources to better assist New Jersey's affected populations. The New Jersey Disaster Mental Health Helpline has been activated as part of the state's response to Superstorm Sandy. It is one of the key public access points to the New Jersey Hope and Healing Project, which provides emotional support to Sandy survivors in New Jersey disaster-declared counties. So, Carolyn, please unmute your phone by pressing *7, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you today. I have no idea how large this call is, so I think I won't even think about that. I'll just assume I'm talking to a few people, and that'll be just fine with me. I think Wendy touched on a number of very important issues, and I think the first one I'd like to pick up on is the idea that we learned a lot from previous hurricanes, and I think one of the things that we saw happen very differently with Hurricane Sandy was that, and I don't really know how quickly FEMA responded, but I know how quick to other hurricanes, but I do know how well and quickly they responded in terms of this hurricane, to Hurricane Sandy. FEMA was active immediately regarding the emotional response that people have, recognizing the correlation, really, between this kind of disaster and mental wellness. I would say within a week of the hurricane, we had been contacted by FEMA because we had a division, a director of disaster response, and we had been training people across the state as volunteers to respond when there's disasters. So FEMA contacted us, the Division of Mental Health Services contacted us and asked us if we would be one of the major providers of crisis counseling in response to the emotional needs that people have when they're faced with a disaster. And as Wendy was saying, of course, depending on resilience, depending on the circumstances, depending on how difficult things are, people are going to have a variety of different needs. And I think in the past, and what I thought was quite different this time, in the past there's been a lot of course, immediate response to the physical needs, to housing, to food. You have to handle safety first and foremost. But very quickly after that, there was a recognition that we also needed to be out there trying to address emotional needs of people. So as we began doing our work, and frankly, we're statewide. We're a statewide advocacy organization, and part of that is a grassroots ability to organize people to be out, particularly in Ocean and Atlantic counties, which served us very well, and to be out there actually while the hurricane was happening, simply as part of Mental Health Association, trying to find people, trying to be sure that the shelters were being available, trying to get people to shelters, finding out what they needed, working closely with Red Cross in a number, I think in at least 2 instances that we were aware of in both Atlantic and Ocean County, and focusing on the substance abuse, mental health issues that people had immediately. And, of course, people were very frightened. Their balance was of course, challenged, and we began responding immediately. With the resources that came with FEMA, I think within 3 weeks to a month, we had hired 150 counselors. They were out across the state in the 9 most impacted counties, and their function was, we've rebranded it as emotional, taking the emotional temperature of people and finding out what their emotional needs were. And it's interesting, we've used this whole process over the past year, not deliberately, but simply it's kind of evolved this way. We moved away from talking about, and I noticed Wendy did a nice job with that too, from talking about mental illness to mental health to emotional wellness. And people, I think, have become much more aware that an emotional response to something that has drastically changed your life is a very natural thing. You may need help and support and certain services in response to that based on what your past has been, what your mental health history has been, who you are. But almost everyone is going to have an emotional response. So our crisis counselors were out there immediately. Excuse me. FEMA had picked up and helped us do a great deal more than we had done before. And we had people out in the streets knocking on doors, going to food pantries, going to shelters all over the place. But mostly their goal was to simply touch base with people. They're called crisis counselors. How are you? Provide support. We were able to go back 4 or 5 times to check on people, see what their needs were, and then link them to case management. And what we discovered at the very beginning, if we looked at reactions, was people were angry. People were very upset, of course, and they were very angry. And they were angry at the fact that all of this had been taken away from them. They were frightened. And that they had to start, as soon as the hurricane was over, there had to be a waiting period. And so there was a lot of, why can't we rebuild? Why can't I get back into my home? How the push to return to normalcy as soon as you can. So a lot of the work that counselors were doing was trying to help people be realistic, help them set smaller goals for themselves, help refer them. And the referral piece that was very helpful was if they needed professional help, if they needed a counseling appointment, they could refer them to our disaster line that has always been here and was again activated for this disaster. So you can see a crisis counselor down in Ocean County or in Atlantic County talking to someone who's obviously having a very hard time and can't get to whatever their resource used to be. They can't reach that resource and they need a referral. So they could then call up to our helpline, and that helpline would immediately connect them and have someone call them back, or link it so that someone could be out to help them within a very short period of time. So the counselors were able to facilitate those kinds of things using the on-the-ground approach, using the phone and its resources, and then linking them to service. Was that successful all the time? No. But it was a very interesting way to do the kind of grassroots organizing that's so helpful after this kind of disaster. So a year later, we look at where are we now. We've made inroads into, I would say, most of the communities certainly down south. We have team leaders in every impacted county. It has to be well organized, and I think it has been very well organized. But some of the same problems still exist. We still have people who are not back in their homes. We still have people who have mold remediation that hasn't happened. We still have people who don't know how high to build their home because the towns haven't made that, or someone at the federal level hasn't made that determination. So we still have people who are angry, still have people who are upset, still have people who are getting depressed. And, you know, in the beginning, one of the feelings that we saw was that people were hopeful. They thought that they might be angry, but they thought, all right, if I get the right forms, if I do the right thing, if I contact the right people, I can get where I need to go. Well, it's a year later, and they're looking at that, and they're looking back, and they're saying, I still haven't gotten there. So the hope has dropped, and of course the whole title for this particular project is Hope and Healing, for very good reason. So we're seeing that for many people that has happened, and they have recovered, and they are doing well. But in particular, we've been able to identify several populations that are in need, we think, of more intervention. We know that FEMA will be pulling out most probably in the middle of February. Their resources will stop. Our concern has been for the most vulnerable populations, and we've targeted 3 of them. We've targeted children, we've targeted elderly, and we've targeted the disabled, physically disabled, emotionally disabled. And we are still finding people that have not been reached. They are, as they describe it on the ground, people coming out of the woodwork, people who simply have been isolated, depressed, whatever they've been doing it pretty much by themselves, and we've been very concerned. We've been very fortunate also to receive a grant from Robert Wood Johnson to pursue this particular population, vulnerable populations, and we're very grateful that we can continue doing that in Ocean, Atlantic. It's going to be very important that we continue this. The work with children has been ongoing, but again, it's difficult. The work in the schools has been difficult, pretty much non-existent, because the schools have their own agenda. They have to be very, very aware that they're there to educate and to provide the kind of support that a school system would provide. So the after-school programming is something that we've tried to do through Hope and Healing. That's coming to fruition right about now. And there have been other outreaches to children. So, for instance, in food pantries, there are children's corners, and there are games that are played, and there are topics that are broached. But now we're just beginning a very structured approach that got kicked off, I think, last week, where there will be, I believe it's 6 sessions in a number of the schools in the school districts, where after school the kids will be there. They will have a certain activity with a message to it, of course, and then they will have papers that they take home with them, explaining to the parents what the topic has been, and also suggesting what the parents can talk to the children about. One of the main issues that has come up is families don't know what to bring up with their children. It's difficult to know how much to disclose. And one of the things that we picked up from our crisis counselors was that children respond to this, whether actually they have a harder time if the family is not talking to them about it, because they're out with peers. They hear what's happened. Some of them have been shifted to other schools. They've lost their housing. And even those who haven't and are back in the same surroundings have people around them who have suffered from this. So children really need, basically the rule of thumb has been, if the family is doing well and the communication remains open among family members, the children do well too. So the goal in treatment, or in intervention, I should say, has been to try to help the family open communication, talk about how they're feeling, talk to their children, and share with them and allow the children to express what's going on. And that's really, frankly, the overall goal that's happening with the Hope and Healing Children's piece right now. The other thing I would share with you is we believe that in planning for future disasters, what we've seen is that the public in general really wants to be helpful with these things, and they don't always know what to do, and they're particularly unclear about how to deal with folks who may look like they're acting different. They're not sure that if it's a mental illness, people are frightened and they don't know what to do or whether they should. And we had many examples of that. People coming up to our crisis counselors and saying, this person used to be that way and now they're this way. I don't know what to do. A postman who stopped one of our crisis counselors and said, there's something wrong in this house. This woman hasn't been door to door in 4 days, and she's always come out to greet me, and I don't know what to do. So we've tried to, and this is again through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, take mental health first aid and adapt it. Train people. I think we're training 30 people in mental health first aid to be able to go out and train groups, gatekeeper groups, in recognizing what they're looking at, how to intervene in a very non-threatening way, and if possible, provide a little support, and then if they think it's possible, make a recommendation if they think someone's really pretty sick, pretty ill. That's been a way of engaging people to help each other. And because, as Wendy was saying before, this is not a popular illness, mental illness, we think that the more we can engage people, person to person, the more the discrimination will recede. And we're seeing that happen. That's one of the wonderful, I'm not sure anything's wonderful after this disaster, but it's one of the positive aspects that we're seeing mayors in towns. We're seeing police officers, prosecutors, all calling up our counselors and saying, please come and address this group. We need you here. We need you there. It's important. And they've really recognized that the emotional component is an integral part of helping people cope and adapt. So it's really, I think, a wonderful way to reduce the stigma. The dilemma that I see is that once FEMA pulls out, we still have, I think, a lot more work to do. And we're continuing on a couple of counties. I was giving a reporter a rundown on this last week, and her question to me was, well, who's going to be helping with vulnerable populations in the other counties, the other 7 counties? And nobody had asked me that. I said, I don't know. Hopefully some of the mental health centers can pick some of it up. But it's been a very special experience to have the ability to really organize on the ground and intervene as needed. It's been, I think, pretty successful, very successful.
Thank you, Carolyn. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Carol Chang, Chief Program Officer for the New Jersey region of the American Red Cross, and Judy Rogers, Case Management Supervisor for the American Red Cross. The Red Cross met Sandy's significant damage with its largest U.S. response in 5 years and provided several months of emergency relief to people whose lives were disrupted by the storm. More than 17,000 trained Red Cross workers from all over the country, 90% of them volunteers, have worked on Hurricane Sandy response and recovery efforts. Trained Red Cross workers are currently meeting one-on-one with those in need, providing case management and financial assistance to help with security and utility deposits, home repairs, and rent, as well as linking them to available social service programs. The Red Cross has given nearly $60 million in grants to nonprofits working in New Jersey and New York to help people with home repairs, mold remediation, food, financial assistance, financial counseling, all to support the work of community roundtables that will help ensure that Sandy's needs are met. Carol and Judy, please press *7 to unmute your phones, and it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Wendy. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, and I just want to thank the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, too, for the tremendous support that the foundation has played, not only during Hurricane Sandy, but during other types of disasters and other phases of disasters as well. And, as you may know, that disasters, there's a cycle for disasters, preparedness, response, and recovery, and the foundation has been so supportive in all phases of the disaster cycle, not only providing direct assistance, which is the food, the shelter, and the cleanup items for disaster-affected populations they really need to rebuild, but also to work on some of that pre-disaster work that a lot of organizations don't. When the disaster is gone and when there's no disaster there, it doesn't seem to be as important. And the foundation has really been supportive of different tools such as the Coordinated Assistance Network, which is a way that nonprofit organizations can coordinate our client assistance to make sure that there is no duplicated assistance provided to people in need. And so thank you very much. And I just want to echo Nina's statement that philanthropies can play such a large role in all phases of the disaster cycle. I just wanted to provide a quick overview of Red Cross Disaster Mental Health Services, and then my colleague Judy will discuss what she and her case managers are currently seeing on the ground as they do their case management work in the field. The Red Cross is an organization. We respond to about 70,000 disasters every year, and most of them are local disasters. That's the household fire or the apartment fire, and our volunteers will get up in the middle of the night and provide individuals that in need, people who have been displaced by fires, but with food and with shelter and with clothing to help them get past their local disasters. But of course, we also provide assistance during larger scale relief operations such as Hurricane Sandy. And in disaster mental health, we continually train disaster mental health workers for both the local responses and for the larger scale relief operations. The volunteers are trained to provide support to both clients and to disaster workers, and because both become very impacted by disasters. Across the country right now, there are approximately 5,000 Red Cross disaster mental health workers that respond to our 70,000 disasters each year. And Red Cross disaster mental health workers must have a current license that's been issued by a state or U.S. territory licensing board, and then they help us to prepare to work across all parts of the disaster cycle. The three elements of disaster mental health response are identifying what those mental health needs are, promoting resilience and coping skills, and implementing targeted interventions for people in need. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the response part of what we did during Hurricane Sandy, during our response operation, and Judy will talk about the long-term recovery efforts. In the response phase of an operation, evacuations can displace individuals and can disrupt people's health-related care, particularly people with special needs. And so during Hurricane Sandy, our shelter workers experienced approximately 5 to 10% of the people that received Red Cross services in Red Cross shelters had some sort of special health or mental health need. So the Red Cross responds to these needs in a lot of different ways, but the most important is by ensuring that the health needs of populations are met by assigning a Red Cross trained health and mental health worker to each shelter where people are evacuated into. Across the state during Hurricane Sandy, the Red Cross provided about 28,000 health and mental health contacts. So Judy is going to talk a little more about what we're doing in long-term recovery and what she's seeing across the state. So Judy, you want to take it over?
Hello, everyone. I'm a case management supervisor with the Red Cross. So I supervise case managers who make home visits to clients, residents who were impacted by Sandy, as well as phone calls. And although they are not mental health professionals, they've gone out and formed bonds and relationships over the course of the past 9 to 10 months with impacted residents, and over the course of time, we've been able to see what's been occurring. It's been a year since the storm, so the feelings and emotions and situations for people have changed. But approximately a month ago, knowing that the anniversary was upon us pretty quickly, I asked my staff to start noticing, recording, and sending to me the signs, symptoms, and behaviors they were seeing in our residents. And I'm going to very briefly just go through those. So what we're seeing right now is quite a bit of depression. It's often related to lack of employment, underemployment, jobs that were lost either directly or indirectly to Sandy. We're also seeing financial distress and anxiety related to the loss of jobs or to the cost of rebuilding not only homes but rebuilding lives. We're seeing a great deal of marital and family distress, a lot of anxiety, probably just a small amount of post-traumatic stress, but definitely a lot of anxiety. We're seeing residents who have addictions that are either new addictions or they've experienced a relapse. We have a few residents who are discussing divorce. It's interesting. Immediately after the storm, the sense that people feel is everyone has come together and it feels good. A year later, many of them now feel like things are falling apart, including their marriages. We have some students who are doing poorly in school with grades who have dropped. And we do have clients with a prior mental health history who have seen a worsening of symptoms, and clients with a prior physical and medical problems who've seen a worsening of symptoms. And in a small number of residents, we've seen some extreme issues like paranoia and hoarding. But probably the predominant emotion that we're seeing at this point, a year later, is anger and frustration, a lot of that. I wanted to give two really, really brief examples because I wanted you guys to understand that most of the residents that we're talking to are just ordinary people who had no involvement with the mental health system prior to Sandy, and these are very brief. One is a 50-year-old female who's afraid to leave her home. Her home was rebuilt fairly quickly, but most of the other people in her neighborhood have not been able to rebuild their homes. She feels so guilty she stopped going to her church because she does not want to face her neighbors whose homes are not repaired, and she's becoming more and more isolated and depressed. And the other one is a 46-year-old male client who feels exhausted. He's tired of applying for help and not receiving assistance. He's experiencing mood swings, feels tired of rejection letters and empty promises. He's also very anxious that he's going to lose his job. So this is just an example of the very ordinary kind of people that we're talking to who, although we're not assessing their mental health needs, we're there to make a referral and a recommendation and to help link them if they need services. And that's pretty much it for me. Okay.
Thank you, both of you. Nina, shall we open the lines up for Q&A now?
That would be great. And people can press *7 to unmute their line. Wendy, I didn't know if you had anything to start. I also just want to caution, we have a history of having a very quiet group. So Carolyn, Carol, Judy, don't take it personally. You've given a lot of fantastic information and a lot for people to think about. Sometimes people will email me their questions rather than speaking up, but sometimes people will speak up as well. So people can.
Wendy, I'm happy to start the questions, and I know part of the work that we're funding, the Mental Health Association of New Jersey, of course, is a focus on children. And Carolyn, you talked about how the schools are sort of a different system, so it's hard to work within the schools. But I did notice that there just recently in the past, I guess 2 months or so, there's been a social service block grant to help schools deal with the issues of mental health because of Hurricane Sandy. And I guess my question is to either the speakers or anybody on the line, is it a good idea to think about partnering with the state and leveraging that opportunity?
This is Carolyn. It's a good question because the block grant money will last 2 years.
Right.
What's the process on that? I mean, is it the schools applying for the grant?
They're doing it through the Department of Children and Families, and I'm not familiar enough to be able to tell you that.
Okay.
I will tell you that as I can relate it to the Division of Mental Health, what they're doing within that division is enhancing existing programs. So they're using block grant money to enhance outpatient employment services, emergency services, things like that. Now, DCF could have chosen a different path. I don't know.
I had a question, I think primarily for Carolyn, but anyone is encouraged to jump in. We learned very early on one of the first calls that we did back in November from what they post Katrina, John from Baton Rouge Community Foundation spoke with John Davies, talked about the mental health program that they rolled out there. And one of the key things they learned from that is that they actually rolled it out too quickly. That they thought that symptoms would start showing at 6 to 9 months, and what they found is that in reality it was more like 12 to 18 months. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the money had been expended by then. And I'm wondering if that was taken into consideration, or how you, understanding that the storms weren't exactly the same, and certainly the demographics and socioeconomics of the two communities are different in many ways, although similar in others. And I'm wondering if any of that was taken into consideration.
Oh, I think definitely it was. The first thing that was funded was the crisis counseling piece, and you want to do that as quickly as you can, because people are if you can catch people at the very beginning and help them both with the natural pieces of the disaster that you can and their emotional response to it, they can regroup much more quickly, and they're not going to need mental health services, hopefully. So the crisis counseling and actually the folks doing the crisis counseling, similar to Red Cross, what you were saying from Red Cross, was that they're not trained in mental health. They're trained in how do you intervene in a crisis. The crisis is happening. You're still in crisis. How do you help people look at what has gotten them through before? So you're really building on people's defenses and on their coping skills, and you're helping them maintain or regain those very quickly, so that you don't need you're not seeing a lot of problems popping up later. So the crisis counseling was appropriate, I think, at the very beginning, as soon as we could make it happen. And then from there, they were funding case management, which is a longer sustained helping hand, so that people could have someone follow them through, all the way through as far as they needed to go to get resolution. And that could be a counselor, or it could be helping them, whoever they needed to call and bother and help them handle the frustrations they were dealing with all of the practical aspects, so that they maintained their hope. So it kind of moved that way, from crisis counseling to case management, and then referrals if needed, with the understanding that you're not going to see post-traumatic stress for probably the first 6 months.
So then what is it that, so by putting the program in the schools now as opposed to back in the spring, that's all part of that strategy, or?
I wish I could say that it was so well thought out that that's true. But no, what happened actually, I'll be very truthful with you, was that we approached schools and we asked if we could come in and do programming. But the programming we wanted to do would have taken a fair chunk out of the day for the kids, and the schools turned us down. They said, no, we can't do that. We need to, and for good reason. You look back on it and you say, well, of course, they need to provide the same support and the same structure that they've always provided. And I'm sure there were other things that I won't even think about that had the school saying no to us. So we were forced to find informal ways to reach children. And to take, frankly, within the Mental Health Association, we had developed a goals manual for children that helps them. It teaches probably 6 different lessons in how to cope with life, and it's through stories and through children, reading those stories together, that sort of thing. We took the goals manual, we edited it, and we created our own program, and we're now taking that after school. We're doing it in WISE. We're doing it wherever we can do it, where kids are. So, no, I think we just ran into a bit of a buzzsaw with the school system. And who knows what might have been different, Maybe if we had come in and said, could we have a half hour of time, it would have been different. I don't know. I wasn't part of any of that negotiation. I heard about it when I realized we weren't getting into schools, and that was, everybody was probably very overwhelmed. So, no, that was not planful. That was us dancing because we had to figure out some way to get to kids.
Okay, thanks. Any questions? Press *7 to unmute your line. I've gotten one email in for Carolyn. Is there any kind of collaboration with faith-based community organizations in identifying and treating people with the mental issues or PTSD?
Thank you for reminding me of that. In Ocean County, we are working with, I don't know which church it is, but it's through one of the long-term recovery groups, and it's a woman who's, I don't know what her role is, but she is helping us roll out bringing mental health into the faith-based community. And we have done that in the past and have not been able to sustain it in terms of finance. We went into it thinking that churches, you can tell I'm not a churchgoer because I thought the churches would pay for the service, and churches have to support themselves, so they're obviously not going to pay for a service like this. But we were doing what we called PEWS, the PEWS program, and it was a spirituality program and mental health. So we're reviving that in partnership down in Ocean County. We're very excited about it, and I know that we're getting that help through a grant. I think it's Robert Wood Johnson. Wendy, you would know that maybe better than I.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
Caroline, I think that's the Red Cross grant.
Oh, thank you. I was afraid to say that because I was afraid it wasn't. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And then just asking if for anybody on the call, the other question was, do we know how many New Jerseyans might be struggling with PTSD issues now? I know, Judy, you had mentioned that, you'd gone through, which was really helpful to sort of what the issues are that you're seeing. And it sounds like anxiety and anger are the 2 big ones.
Yeah, anxiety and anger, really only a small number at this point of post-traumatic stress disorder. The next couple of days there might be a few other incidents, but we'll see.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry. We actually accidentally knocked the phone off. But this is Carol. And just what we've learned here at the Red Cross about the psychological impact of post-disasters, on average, what we've seen through many different disasters, and of course there is significant variability depending on the disaster, factors such as the severity of exposure to disaster or traumatic loss of loved ones or community level impacts, loss of social support can really impact these things. But on average, we find that about 30 to 40% of direct victims of disaster will experience some sort of disorder, whether it's PTSD, depression, or an anxiety. And as Carolyn had mentioned, children, and Wendy had mentioned, children emerge with the greatest risk. And what we've seen in previous disasters is about 5 to 10% of the people in the community at large tend to be at risk of disorders, as well as 10 to 20% of responders.
Okay, thank you.
This is Wendy from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I just want to add too that I think in the beginning, when of course the disaster hit, there was so much in trying to help people just come out from under the storm, and there was a lot of not enough, but there was a lot of support and a lot of resources flying around. Whether they were able to be utilized or not, that's a whole other issue. But I think what's important is, a year after the storm, some people at this point, they could just start losing hope now that they're not going to get the kind of help that they need after trying. And I think there's less resources now and less people committed to a recovery than there was relief. So it's just another thing to think about.
Wendy, that's a perfect tip, because I wanted to ask Carolyn again, because you mentioned that FEMA will be leaving soon, and what does that trigger on the mental health work? Remind folks again what that triggers when FEMA leaves. What does that mean? Because it sounded like you're only working in 2 counties.
No, we have teams in all of the 9 most impacted counties.
Does that include Cumberland? Is Cumberland one of those? Okay.
No, it isn't. What that means is that our teams are finished. All of our teams, our team leaders, our crisis counselors are no longer functional.
Once FEMA leaves?
Yes. And that will stop our children's efforts as well. Now that's, that will be bolstered a little bit from grant funding that we're getting. But the grant funding is in 2 counties, and the other.
What are those 2 counties again?
Well, it's a little different because, and I wanted to add Red Cross. Red Cross has just recently granted us funding for the 2 counties, Ocean and Atlantic. And part of what Robert Wood Johnson is funding for us is predominantly in Ocean and Atlantic, but it also includes a little bit of Monmouth for the mental health first aid piece. So we'll be able to continue those aspects. One of them is, it's called Our Post, Recovery Post, and that's a peer-to-peer program where we're going to be able to case manage folks, the most vulnerable populations. And what we're doing, and Atlantic has already been doing it, and I think they're starting in Ocean as well, they're hiring people, seniors, to reach out to seniors, people who've had mental illness reaching out to others, and they're working with families to get to children and to be of assistance there. So the question is, if we can do that in 2 counties, what happens in the other 7 counties? And I don't know the answer, because I think, we have a community mental health system. We have a fairly comprehensive public community mental health system. We've been referring people there when they actually need therapy. But as everyone has been saying, not a lot of people have needed therapy. I think, as I think it was Carol was saying, given the marital problems we're seeing, the family problems, there may be more of a need. We may be seeing more of a need now for mental health services, for some family therapy, for some marital counseling. There are agencies to provide that, and they've also been granted through Pat Christie's organization. I can't remember the actual
The Relief Fund, yeah.
Yes, the Relief Fund has done some nice funding around some mental health services as well. And I'm not sure that they'll be providing more grants, but they've been helping out with some of the mental health centers and some of the existing mental health services, allowing them to bring in more staff, expand what they're doing. So that's continuing on.
And that's continuing in all 9?
No.
Okay.
That's really agency by agency, because they ask for proposals, and people have to then submit the proposal from each agency, and there's a team of people who then review those, make recommendations, and then the fund decides which ones they're going to fund.
So this is why I wanted to get at this, to help our funders understand that once FEMA leaves, there's no longer a comprehensive structure in place where mental health relief and recovery is concerned.
That's right.
And that at this point, your work will be continuing in Atlantic and Ocean County and a little bit of Monmouth County, but nothing in Bergen, nothing in Hudson, nothing in Essex, and from what I understand, there's been nothing at all in Cumberland, and nothing and you won't continue in Middlesex either. And it sounds like the bulk of Monmouth County. And so then it becomes on the local providers who will need to ramp up their services because more people are going to be knocking on the door. Is that what you're saying?
I think in terms of therapy, yes, there will be. And I think that one of the dangers is that as people become more hopeless or more depressed, they're not as quick to reach out. And one of the benefits of having crisis counselors who have been able to actually pursue people is that they've done it and they've been able to assess and recognize and make that link with people. And no one's going to be doing that. It'll have to come from the people themselves. So, our helpline, our New Jersey Mental Health Cares continues on, but people have to know that it's there and that they can reach it and that somebody will help them figure out what they need. So you're right. The bulk of the services stops, and the wonderful coordination, in each county stops. Now, what does continue are the long-term recovery groups.
Right.
And they're funding to a certain degree, although their philosophy, I think, has gotten in the way a bit because they've based their giving on last dollar in, and when you do that, and you're waiting to hear from insurance, and you're waiting to hear how high you have to build your house, and you're waiting for FEMA to give you money, nothing happens. And so in a couple of the counties, that there's not been any money going out of the long-term recovery groups. Some of the others have gone past that and have said, listen, this is a unique situation. It's a disaster that we've never known the scope of before, and we are giving out money now, and we're helping people. And, that will continue. But, yeah, there's going to be a big chunk that's missing. And, just to put a bit of irony on it, the day they're predicting to stop is February 14th.
That FEMA will leave is February 14th.
Yes.
Yeah. Happy Valentine's Day.
Right.
Any questions? I've been dominating, and I didn't mean to do that.
Nina?
Yeah.
It's Nancy Hamilton from the Community Foundation.
Great. Thanks, Nancy.
I did have one question. Since once FEMA pulls out, is there an interest in continuing the programs that additional funding could be found in the non-Robert Wood Johnson funded counties?
Oh, I think it's essential.
Okay. So you will be looking for funding for those other counties?
Well, you know what? If we had the ability, I think we would.
Okay.
Because we've got the structure, we've got the people, everything's in place.
It'd be great to keep it going.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We just, as we talk about it, we talk about probably needing another year.
Wow.
And I mean that's guesswork, but.
And what would that what would you need for another year? And I realize you may not have that number, but I would encourage you to get it to me, and I can get it out to people so people can understand what the scope.
Yeah, I don't have any idea, actually.
Right. So if you could work that up, that would be helpful, or at least to get a ballpark.
Okay, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you for asking.
*7 to unmute your line. Other questions? I had a question for Carol. With the that's impressive that you've got 5,000 mental health workers across the country, that are part of Red Cross to be able to respond. And you said that there were 28,000 in New Jersey post. You had 28,000 folks helping.
We had 28,000 mental health contacts.
Mental health. I'm sorry. Oh, so you had 28,000 requests for assistance related to mental health?
Actually, it's health and mental health, and so those were our contacts with clients, either for a mental or health issue.
I see. And so, how many of those 5,000 that you've got? How many are there any that are still deployed here in New Jersey?
Well, on an ongoing basis, we train disaster mental health, our local volunteer base. We train mental health workers as a regular course of what we do because so it's not only the large-scale disasters like the Hurricane Sandy's, but also if a family's house burns down, that can create a lot of the same types of psychological distress as a larger-scale disaster. So on an ongoing basis, we have disaster mental health training for our volunteer base.
And do you have any sense of what you've got going in New Jersey right now?
I think across the state of New Jersey, we have, I can get you the exact numbers, but we have, I believe, around 60 to 70 disaster mental health workers.
Great.
And we also have agreements with the state of New Jersey, so we have an MOU with the state of New Jersey, so they also provide assistance during both local and larger scale disasters.
Thank you. It helps people get a sense of the context of what it is here.
Yep, no problem.
Wendy, do you have any other?
No, I just think this has been a really good conversation, and I think we've identified a lot of things that we need to continue talking about and focusing on, like the lack of resources that are going to be there after FEMA leaves, the fact that mental health problems and issues are just going to continue to grow, especially a year after the devastation. I just think everybody made really good points that we need to really start addressing this. So I thought this was a great call.
Great. Thank you. I agree. I want to thank you, Wendy, and Carolyn and Carol and Judy for briefing us today. I think this is enormously helpful. It really helped those working on the issues to understand what it is that we're facing, because I don't think people realized what the status is. And everybody knows that it's a big piece and of the recovery that has to take place. So we really appreciate you taking the time. I'll just say our briefing next week will be our last call in this series. We'll discuss what philanthropy has learned thus far 1 year after Sandy. We're going to hear from our colleagues, including Chris Daggett of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation and the New Jersey Recovery Fund, from Kim Frawley from the New Jersey Hurricane Sandy Relief Fund, Kathy Durante from Ocean First Foundation, who I think everyone knows was absolutely just incredibly invaluable to the funding community and being able to provide real on-the-ground insights. We'll have Bob Ottenhoff from the Center for Disaster Philanthropy and my colleague and dear friend Ronna Brown from Philanthropy New York joining us for the call. We're really looking forward to a spirited discussion and hope that everyone will be able to join us for this final briefing, and I suspect we may need more than an hour on that. So hopefully folks will plan accordingly and not be so shy, since it's colleagues on the call this time. So with that, I'll say thank you again. I want to thank Elizabeth Murphy for all of her good work, continued good work on our behalf. And thanks again to our guests who were terrific, Wendy, Carolyn, Carol, and Judy. Take care, everyone, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand by.